Hello friends, welcome once again to the Abundant Life. In the previous two sessions, we spoke about depression and its symptoms, and next we spoke about depression and its causes. Today we shall speak about depression, its treatment, and the preventive measures that can be followed. There are many myths and fallacies that exist today concerning depression and depressed persons. Very few think of depression as an illness. Rather, they view it as some kind of personal weakness that can be managed by applying a little willpower. Let's take the example of alcoholism and alcoholics. Do you believe that alcoholism is a disease? Well, it certainly is. And many are getting treatment because it is treated as a disease. Depression too is an illness. But sadly, some, especially family members and friends, think that seeking help from doctors, counselors, is a waste of time and money. They may even inwardly think that the person is shamming or faking it and using depression to avoid taking responsibilities. The truth is that depression is certainly an illness, and a treatable illness at that. Such persons don't need simplistic admonitions or advices. They need patience, compassion, and professional help. Yes, depression can be cured through a combination of psychotherapy and medication, as we shall see. However, it's a matter of controversy, even among equally competent experts, about the effectiveness and validity of these treatment techniques individually. So let's look at some popular attempts to treat and cure depression. At the start, I want to say that we are looking at normal remedies and treatment in general, and definitely not treatment for the most serious neuroses or psychoses, which require specialized treatment. The kind of treatment depends upon the cause of the depression, secondly, the abilities and resources of the doctor or counselor, and lastly, the depth of the depression. Let's look at the first, namely drug therapy, which includes antidepressants, tranquilizers, and stimulant drugs, also called amphetamines. In historical times, opiates got from extracts of herbs, plants, and berries were used to sedate or calm the depressed person. Today, after painstaking research and experimentation, pharmaceutical companies have come up with sophisticated and chemically manufactured drugs since the mid-1950s, having the same sedating effect. Drug treatment has its advantages and disadvantages. Among the advantages, it's found that such medication can be given orally or through injections and is quite inexpensive and can be continued for long periods of time. Even general practitioners or family doctors, after some experience, can care for their depressed patients using these drugs without referring them to psychiatrists. On the other hand, among the disadvantages, drug therapy does nothing to help the patient vis-a-vis family relationships or his deeper problems which brought on the depression in the first place. Importantly, drugs have side effects which may be mild or serious. Among the mild, there could be undue perspiration, mouth dryness, constipation, and blurring of the vision. And among the serious, there could be poisoning of the system, or raising or lowering of blood pressure, making treatment impossible. Some drugs may destroy the immune system, leaving the patient open to infection, liver complication, etc. In the US, it is reported that about 35% of depressed patients get cured by drugs, and about 15 to 20% do not respond positively to drug therapy. Then again, the effective drug potency has to be considered. We all know of tablets of 5 mg, 10 mg, 250 mg, 500 mg. All these are prescribed only by the doctor. However, when it comes to the patient having depression, it cannot be ascertained in advance what mg the patient requires, and it can be done only by trial and error. Thereby, for the drugs to take effect, it takes 4 weeks or more, and meanwhile, the patient is at risk of committing suicide. Then again, some amphetamines may become addictive, even dangerously so. Their exhilarating high is usually followed by a corresponding low, which sends the patient into a worse depression than before. Let's look at the second treatment procedure, electrotherapy. During the middle of the previous century, electrotherapy, which was then called EST, that is, electric shock treatments, was the most prominent method of treating depression. Such depression has its treatment adherents and treatment opponents. It involved administering a brief electric shock to the depressed person's brain, which produced an instantaneous convulsion, leaving the patient with total or partial loss of memory called amnesia. The patient, mind you, is asleep during the procedure and generally feels no pain and does not remember anything about the treatment. Meanwhile, the anesthetic wears off in about 20 minutes and the patient's grogginess wears off in about 40 minutes, after which he is free to go home. A total of 5 to 20 such treatments are administered over a period of a few weeks or days, with breaks in between. With each such treatment, the amnesia or loss of memory is supposed to increase, thus helping the patient to forget his cares and worries which brought on his depression. The disadvantage here is that the patient experiences a loss of memory for both good and bad things that occurred in his life, and the fear is that the process may be harmful to the brain in the long run. Electric shock treatments may cure the symptoms, but not the problem that caused them. Hence, there is need for either a change in the circumstances that caused the depression, or that the patient experiences a change in his thinking pattern that caused the depression. This can happen only through psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is simply defined as talk treatment and was commonly practiced long before EST emerged in the 1940s. It consists of a depressed person or counselee speaking freely to a doctor or counselor. Most of us, you will agree, need some friend to unburden our problems on to. All the more, the depressed person needs such a friend. Through psychotherapy, such a depressed person who feels rejected, hopeless, and alone has access to the patience, understanding, and concern of a counselor in confidentiality and privacy. Remember, the counselee is depressed due to a faulty thinking problem. So, the counselor examines his values and judgments towards other people so as to help him understand himself better and learn to relate properly to others. Let's take an example. A boy is rejected by his girlfriend and he goes into depression. The doctor, the counselor, helps him to understand what went wrong in their relationship. One comes across various types of counselors today. Let's focus on two such counselors: the non-directive counselor and the humanistic psychologist. The non-directive counselor believes he should never impose his perspective or concepts on the counselee, but merely serve as a sounding board to him, expecting him to organize his own principles for living. For example, let's say the counselee asks the counselor whether he should change his job. The counselor will only say, "What do you think about it yourself?" Usually, the counselee does not have the answers or solutions within himself. And such long periods of non-directive counseling may lead to frustration in both the counselor as well as the counselee. In addition, it becomes an exceptionally long and expensive process for the counselee or his family, as each session of approximately half an hour to 1 hour requires them to pay Rs 500 to 1,000 or more. Let's look at the humanistic counselor. He tries to solve problems of man irrespective and independent of God, forgetting what Jesus said, "Without me, you can do nothing." Sometimes the humanistic counselor may seek to impose his humanistic principles and values upon the counselee. For example, if the counselee is facing guilt problems over an extramarital affair, the amoral counselor may just ignore or explain such feelings and telling the counselee, "Don't worry about it, it's normal." And this leads to increased extramarital, so-called guilt-free activity in the counselee. But in many cases, it is eventually followed by an overwhelming consciousness of guilt that far exceeds the original problem. Strangely, many counselors are not fully convinced that psychotherapy alone has the answer. What then is the answer or answers? Let's look at the next point. Requesting God or praying for help through the Psalms. If you are a Christian, you are certainly familiar with the Psalms. But how often do you and I pray with the Psalms? Certain Psalms provide great solace to those undergoing depression, either read out aloud to them, or if they themselves pray directly with the Psalms. The words of some Psalms are so deeply touching that the depressed person can easily identify with the psalmist and feel as if the psalmist understands his deep pain. This certainly helps in the healing process. Let's consider a couple of examples. The most widely known Psalm 23 has two meaningful lines for the depressed person's soul. Verse 1 says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." What a beautiful thought. If the Lord is my shepherd, I will need nothing. And verse 3 says, "He restores my soul." The depressed person definitely wants God to restore his soul. Let's look at Psalm 130, verses 1 and 2, which express the desperate need of the depressed soul. "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord." What are these depths? The depths of depression. "Lord, hear my voice." How consoling it is to the depressed person when he can pray aloud to the Lord. Many other verses from different Psalms are great helps, not just to depressed persons, but also to you and me when we are facing distressing times. For example, I would recommend that you read Psalm 25, especially verses 1 and 2 and 16 and 17. The next point that we can consider is exercise therapy. Some modern day researchers have stressed the value of exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, accompanied by music, in the treatment of mild to moderately depressed persons under an instructor who takes them through the routines. Such exercise keeps their minds and bodies focused on things other than the things that brought on the depression. However, the research was carried out and confined mostly to younger adults, as depressed older adults were not able to exercise aerobically. A good thing is that our CCR TV channel is perhaps unique in that it has a program exercise for senior citizens, which are actually performed by senior citizens under the tutelage of a physiotherapist. Such exercises will surely prevent any early onset of depression in them, if at all. The next point we could consider is spiritual therapy. Many people think that spiritual persons do not or cannot become depressed. This is erroneous and faulty thinking. For example, even in biblical times, a spirit-filled prophet like Elijah knew depression, as we read in 1 Kings chapter 19 verses 4 and following, about his fatigue, disturbed sleep, poor appetite, and his desire for death, all of which are symptoms of depressed persons. As Christians, we trust in the power of our faith and spiritual resources, especially the sacraments, to fight depression. They provide significant assistance in combating depression. But an exclusively spiritual approach is not enough. Faith certainly heals, but God is not displeased or angry when it is united with other forms of treatment. Let's take an analogy. If your child is running a high temperature, will you just pray over the child? Surely not. You would need to apply cold compresses, give fever medication, and even take the child to the doctor. Likewise, in the case of depression, in addition to spiritual resources, we need the help of doctors, counselors, pastors, and other professionals who have skills that can help put us on the road to recovery. God offers them to us as gifts. A very important resource is the sacrament of confession or reconciliation. Many post-abortion women face a great deal of depression. It has been found that when they attend an inner healing retreat and confess their sins, they experience tremendous grace and relief. Likewise, it's an acknowledged fact that the number of depression cases is far less than it might have been because of the sacrament of confession available to Catholics. I'd like to say here that counselors and others would run out of business if there were no confession, which is a free gift and a blessing that sadly many of us Catholics are not availing of today. Instead, we don't mind spending thousands over lay counselors and psychiatrists. Mind you, it's even more efficacious when we have a regular confessor or spiritual father. I personally can vouch for this because I have had a spiritual father for over 35 years. And when my wife passed away, it was my spiritual father who helped me overcome the onset of depression. How sad it is that the worst form of depression or despair is to give up on God and resort to taking one's own life in suicide. Another important point is supportive contact with family and friends. This is essential for recovery from depression. Isolation and withdrawal from social contacts only serves to feed the illness of depression and reduces the effectiveness of treatment. The person suffering from depression needs warm human contact and support, not just from his doctor or psychotherapist, but also from immediate family and friends. Yes, indeed, participating in a loving, caring relationship is imperative to recovery of the depressed person. Very often, the person in the throes of depression is touch-starved. I remember when I took my catechism children to Mother Teresa's orphanage, there were babies there who would lift up their arms begging for us to carry them. They wanted this physical human contact. But the nuns said, no, please don't carry them, because once you are gone, who will carry those babies? Sadly, it is true. Physical contact, which is missing, truly helps to soothe, calm, and restore not only those babies, but also depressed persons. A warm handshake, a pat on the back may help. Parents, hug your children on a daily basis and you will keep problems away. Research on marriage has shown that if one spouse is depressed and the other spouse fails to understand or recognize it and is even hostile or critical, the depressed person may go into deeper depression. Weak marriage relationships inhibit recovery of the depressed person. On the other hand, good marital relationships may prevent depression. A simple point to consider is introducing changes in the environment of the depressed person, where possible. It shows a great deal of help in the healing process. Such changes could be as simple as changing the color of one's curtains, or the color of the wall paint, or the wallpaper, or rearranging the furniture. In extreme cases, one may have to move away from jobs or situations or surroundings that cause major stress, or simply just take time off. Next, let's consider observing a positive attitude to life situations. This helps in preventing potential depression in persons. For example, a no to self-pity is a very important factor in depression. Self-pity really brings on depression insidiously, so take care. Then again, we all talk to ourselves when alone. This is called self-talk. But let's say a firm no to negative self-talk, where we tell ourselves, I'm not worthy, I'm not capable, I can't do this, I can't do that. And instead, say a yes to positive self-talk, where we tell ourselves, I am okay, I am capable, I am worth, I can do things. A yes to going out of your way to reach out to others is also important. Through service therapy, for example in church, in hospitals, orphanages, etc. Then again, following a routine helps the patient. It is also true that tears are healing, and so don't tell a person to stop crying unless it is excessive. Laughter is therapeutic. That's why we have laughter clubs today. Laugh, even at yourself if need be. Find something creative to do. For example, hobbies such as painting, pottery, gardening, etc. Don't ruminate or obsessively think and rethink the same thoughts about something that has upset you. We've seen cows who ruminate. Let's not become like cows. Let me tell you about my recent example. I was extremely angry and upset about something that happened in my life, where I was unjustly accused. And I kept on ruminating about it the whole night, till I decided that it was not going to help me. And what did I do? I got up and I wrote a long WhatsApp message to the person who had hurt me. Really long WhatsApp message. And what happened? After that I was free. I did not have to go into depression or keep on ruminating about anything at all. So friends, let's look at the next point. A no-nonsense attitude. Let's remember that depression is part and parcel of the human condition. But in most cases, it appears to be temporary and is a normal response to loss, painful experiences, or crises. For example, when your boss scolds you rudely for an error, or when you experience a death of a friend or a loved one, or you move residence to a new and faraway place, all these can bring on sadness and a temporary state of depression. But importantly, in such cases, we need to snap out of it and adopt a no-nonsense attitude, lest it impairs our functioning if we let it linger, and this may gradually become more serious. Let me tell you the example of when I was in a boarding. We were 3 persons sharing a room, and the landlady lost her son abroad. For the first 2 or 3 days, people came and condoled with her, but soon after that, she went into depression. And we 3 who were young did not know how to help her. She went into such a state that she forgot where she was, who she was, and if anybody asked her about her son, she would say, "Son? Which son? I don't have a son." Or at other times she would say, yeah, he's fine. He's there at his job in the Gulf country." Yes, friends, let's not let depression become so severe that it makes life unbearable. Let me remind you that depression does not mean that life is put on hold, even though you, as the depressed person, may want to run and hide and stop the world and get off for a while. No, when we are depressed, all the more do we need to force ourselves to participate in life anyway. We have to be like clowns who continue clowning even though their hearts may be breaking due to some sad experience. Once again, let me give you the brief example of what happened when my wife died. I wanted to take long leave, but realized that I would go into severe depression. So what did I do? Within 2 or 3 days, I went back to college. And I'm happy I did, because it kept depression away. So friends, to sum up, what have we seen today? D for drug therapy, E for electrotherapy, P for psychotherapy, R for requesting God for help, E for exercise therapy, S for spiritual therapy, S again for supportive contact, I for introducing changes in the environment, O for observing a positive attitude, and N for no-nonsense attitude. Just a reminder that the points that I took are from books by Tim LaHaye and William Rabior, which I have mentioned and focused upon in the previous 2 points. I wish you a depression-free life. God bless you.